Mr. Speaker, I have to say, it's good to be home. After a 12-day journey across the United States, visiting some of the great metropolises and states south of the border, and Beijing, Canada, fighting for tariff-free trade, and arguing on behalf of our workers and restoring our long-standing partnership with our greatest trade partner. That journey, Mr. Speaker, took me to Detroit, where I championed auto workers, coming back with a clear proposal for a tariff-free auto pact. Then it was on to Houston, where I championed our energy sector, and met then on to meet with Governor Abbott in the great capital of Austin, where I found a wonderful friend of Canada who wants to buy even more of our energy if we can get it out of the ground and down. And of course, I was very pleased to speak to Americans, to fight for tariff-free trade, and to defend Canadian sovereignty on the biggest podcast in the world with the great Joe Rogan. Then, of course, it was on to New York, where I championed our overall economy with some of the greatest leaders in finance. In all of these places, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to report that I found friends among Americans, people who want to reopen trade across tariff-free borders along the longest undefended border in the history of the world. I found that the American people love Canada and know that trade with us is in their national interest. They understand that buying Canadian goods lowers Americans' cost of living and feeds their supply chain. It adds paychecks to their pockets while enriching us both. They understand that Canada has leverage, like being the second biggest customer to the United States, like having the 10 of the 12 NATO-defined national defense critical minerals, and like having the biggest landmass, biggest seas, and biggest airspace in the entire hemisphere, all essential to American security. Americans understand that it is in our interest as a continent for our two separate countries to, while they maintain their sovereignty, to work collaboratively to make us both richer, stronger, and safer. And I shall say that I kept the Prime Minister well informed of all these developments while I was abroad, and I look forward to meeting with him to report on my findings, to compare notes, and to offer recommendations on how Canada can become stronger at home, more affordable at home, so that we have the leverage abroad to achieve tariff-free trade with our American partners. And though I made a point of not criticizing the Prime Minister on foreign soil, I return here where it is precisely my constitutional obligation to do just that. Not out of any partisan interest, but out of an interest in pursuing the truth. Now, after a year of this Prime Minister being in office on the promise that he would, quote, negotiate a win with the United States, is a good time to take an inventory of where we are. A year into this Liberal Prime Minister's term, after he won on this famous promise that he would negotiate a win, much has been said, but not much has been done. There have been many fine speeches, signing ceremonies of so-called MOUs, which are in effect unenforceable documents that commit for bureaucrats to form committees and hold international meetings to discuss future plans that may or may not one day be materialized. There have been handshakes and press conferences, announcements of grand goals, of things that will happen somewhere, someplace down the road, but nothing tangible. As Shakespeare said, the whole world is a stage, and the Prime Minister has been great at the stagecraft. But what about the statecraft, Mr. Speaker? He promised that he would give us the fastest growing economy in the G7. We now have the only shrinking economy in the G7. He promised affordable food. We have the most food inflation in the G7. He promised that we would have a solid economy. We now have the worst housing costs and the highest household debt in the G7 and the second highest unemployment in that group. He said that he would negotiate a win with the presidents. Here we are today. A year later, no win, no deal. Tariffs on aluminum and steel have doubled. and on Canadian lumber, they have tripled. He promised that he would build projects with record speed, and yet his major projects office, which this House rushed into existence in 5 days back in June because the Prime Minister said it was an emergency, has still not approved a single project of any kind almost a year later. Not a single pipeline has been approved. And of course, when it comes to building homes, he promised he would double home building. His own housing agency projects that will drop by 15%. There's been no serious tax reform other than to rename the carbon tax into the so-called clean fuel standard, which applies to more goods and will rise to the same level. And of course, there remain interprovincial trade barriers, despite the fact the Prime Minister promised that we would have one unified Canadian economy by Canada Day of last year. Speaking of free trade, he has not concluded a single free trade agreement since taking office, trying only to take credit for a small deal that his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, signed with Indonesia, an agreement that will amount to about 3 hours of Canada's GDP. Nous avons maintenant eu un an de ce Premier ministre libéral et la réalité est en collision avec l'illusion. Le déficit est doublé. Nous sommes la seule économie en contraction du G7, la pire inflation alimentaire du G7, le coût du logement le pire et le plus élevé du G7, le pire dette des ménages du G7, le deuxième pire taux de chômage du G7, une baisse de 15% dans la construction de logements, aucune pipeline approuvée, aucun projet approuvé par son nouveau bureau qui a des pouvoirs exceptionnels et sans précédent. Et malgré sa promesse de négocier une victoire et de conclure un accord d'ici le 21 juillet 2025, il n'y a toujours pas de victoire ni d'entente et les tarifs américains ont doublé sur les produits canadiens, triplé sur le bois d'œuvre. For all the illusions about the Prime Minister's negotiating skills and statescraft, what really do we have to show a year after? What we're increasingly seeing is that American tariffs have doubled on Canadian steel, aluminum, they've tripled on Canadian lumber since the Prime Minister promised he would get rid of them. Credentials are not competence. Stagecraft is not statecraft. Illusions are not reality. Speaking of trade with the United States, Canadians know a lot more about my approach than they do about the Prime Minister's. I want you to stop and think about this for a second. I laid out a very detailed plan of both my demands, eliminating all tariffs on Canadian goods, and the leverage that I would use to get those demands. I would like to ask a pop quiz to the House of Commons. What do we really know about the Prime Minister's plan to get tariffs lifted with the U.S.? What really do we know? Nothing. Is he even determined to get those tariffs lifted? In fact, we've seen Liberal ministers suggest it might now be impossible to do that. Is it still his negotiating bottom line to have those tariffs removed? And if so, what is he planning to offer in exchange for getting them lifted? We don't know. Does his proposed rupture with the U.S. mean he does not want a renewed CUSMA? We don't know. If he does intend to renew CUSMA, does he intend to try and get it renewed exactly as it is, with small changes, or a complete overhaul? Has anybody heard him answer that question? I'm not aware of him telling anyone that. When was the last serious negotiation? We know the Mexicans are negotiating. They're at the table. Has he or anyone in his cabinet actually been at the negotiating table in the last 4 months? I don't mean friendly handshakes, introductions, and exchange of jokes and pleasantries between the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. affairs, a man with a great gregarious personality indeed. I mean actual negotiations. Are they even happening? Has anyone in the press actually asked the Prime Minister if we are even negotiating, given that we are literally days away from the renewal date of our single biggest trade agreement? Nobody knows. He said, who cares? Indeed, I think Canadians care. Does he accept that U.S. tariffs on aluminum, steel, autos, lumber are permanent? We don't know. We have no idea when the talks will start and when they will end. And we've heard him use some very interesting rhetoric, colorful rhetoric, like he wants to have a rupture with our single biggest customer, on whom 2.3 million Canadian jobs depend. And so if he's going to rupture 2.3 million jobs, how is he going to replace them? How will those workers pay their bills? And how will we replace those jobs? These are the types of questions that slogans like rupture, elbows up, and Canada Strong do not answer. While the Prime Minister gives wonderful speeches that make for very interesting listening, and we can admire him as a wordsmith, those speeches do not pay mortgages or put food on the table for 2.3 million people. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister cannot seem to make up his mind about how things are going. On the one hand, he says that the reason we have the only shrinking economy in the G7 is because the tariffs are so bad. On the other, he says there's no need to rush into solving this problem because the deal is so good. So which is it? He can't on the one hand say that he has gotten us an excellent deal on tariffs and then say it on the other that the tariffs are so horrendous that that is the very reason why we have the worst economy in the G7. It cannot be both. He has to make up his mind. Meanwhile, his ministers make patently ridiculous excuses about foreign matters to defend their domestic failures, like the housing minister claiming the war in Iran had caused the housing costs to double over the last decade. Spoiler alert, Mr. Speaker, we do not import houses or land from Iran. We never have. And the housing bubble inflated well before this war even started, which all makes us wonder if the Prime Minister and this Liberal Prime Minister and his government are simply using these foreign problems as excuses for his very real domestic failures, given that everything was bad under his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, and has gotten much worse since he became Prime Minister, promising to fix it all. Mr. Speaker, we all have to ask, how long will this Prime Minister use the trade dispute and other foreign matters as a convenient all-purpose excuse for causing inflation, debt, and joblessness here at home? And what about his auto plan? Canada needs a strong auto sector. And if I could check the time with you, Mr. Speaker, we need a strong auto sector that, according to the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturing Association, is responsible for 105,000 direct jobs and a total of 600,000 jobs when you include indirect ones at places like the 700 auto parts suppliers, the 400 connected autonomous and smart vehicle firms, the 500 tool, die, and mold companies that feed into the supply chain. Since the Liberals took office, auto production in Canada has fallen by half. Since this Prime Minister was elected a year ago promising he would protect the auto sector, it has fallen another 7.3%. The Prime Minister promised before the election that he would protect the sector. It was another illusion. He has since waved the white flag. He even considered signing a sectoral deal in the fall, which would have made the tariffs permanent and shut down our sector altogether. He seems to think that he can carry out a permanent rupture with the United States market in favor of other markets. Mr. Speaker, that is a dangerous illusion. In fact, if you look at the numbers, it verges on a hallucination. The reality is we sell about 95 times more automobiles to the United States than we sell to the rest of the world combined. That is the reality. We cannot simply imagine up new markets to sell cars that we do not make in places that will not buy them from us. The reality is that this approach of relying on imaginary plans has led to 175 layoffs at Paccard au Quebec, 49 layoffs at Magna in London, 3,000 at Brampton Stellantis, 300 at Sainte-Thérèse, Quebec, Paccard, Autonium in London, 118 jobs, TFT, Global, Oshawa, 245 jobs, GM Oshawa, 700 layoffs. Of course, there's the lockouts at the Brampton Stellantis plant where I visited them. A permanent rupture with the United States would be the end of the Canadian auto sector, period. It might not be enjoyable or exciting to say it. It might be more fun to scream elbows up. But the jobs that the people in those plants rely on are more important than the Prime Minister's endless slogans. A permanent rupture to their paychecks is not acceptable. And nor is it possible to simply say we will replace the Detroit 3 automakers with Japanese automakers. Mr. Speaker, the Japanese ambassador made it clear that having Toyota and Honda invest in Canada depends on unfettered access to the U.S. market. Right. So even the 75% of automobiles we make in Canada through the Asian automakers will not survive a permanent wall of tariffs from the United States. We absolutely must regain access to the U.S. market. In essence, losing U.S. access would likely decimate the Japanese-led portion of Canada's auto industry, which is 3/4 of our production. This would lead to a sharp long-term contraction of national production and an economic fallout across Ontario. Canada's auto sector must stay part of the North American supply chain. We need a plan for jobs, not a plan to rupture jobs, Mr. Speaker. We need a Canada that builds up its auto sector so that we can be strong at home and have more leverage abroad. We are as the Conservatives are the only ones that actually have that plan. After months of consultation, led by the chair and the two co-chairs of the Conservative Economic Council, the member for Calgary Centre, the member for Timmins, and the great Rick Perkins, we have put together a plan that has the backing of the industry and the workers. The Conservative plan would make it more affordable to buy Canadian vehicles by removing the GST on all Canadian-made automobiles, and we will pay for it by getting rid of the $2.3 billion Liberal subsidy for foreign-made electric vehicles. We will cut taxes on vehicles made in Canada. Liberals want to use tax dollars for vehicles made abroad. If you want a job in this country, you know what plan is going to work. We will bring home production through performance by implementing a rule where for every car a maker produces in Canada, they will have the right to import one tariff-free from a CUSMA partner. We will do that on a dollar-for-dollar basis, exactly as we used to do through the Auto Pact. This is important because many people will say, will the President ever accept this? This plan will actually increase American and Canadian production. American production by about 2 million automobiles, or about 17% increase in their production, reversing their decline, and it will double Canadian production up to 2 million vehicles every single year. It will ensure that we build as many vehicles as we sell. So this will be a much better deal for our American friends than they have right now, and a significantly better deal for Canada because it aligns with the stated objective of the United States to produce more vehicles at home. It is one they would realistically sign. We develop an automotive security and technology policy by harmonizing our regulations to keep dangerous technology from Russia and China off of our roads. We would stand firm against unfair trade practices by China and align the policies with the United States. We would also get rid of the EV mandate that the Prime Minister is trying to keep in place through the back channel of emissions standards that cannot be met by any other vehicle than an EV. We will ensure that the vehicles Canadians buy on our streets are the ones that are made in our country and that ultimately can be affordable to the Canadian people. Mr. Speaker, this is a detailed plan to reverse the 10-year-long decline in automotive production that will allow North America to once again become the global powerhouse in producing automobiles, that will knock down the barriers and restore tariff-free trade across the border with our single biggest market by far anywhere in the world. This is a realistic plan, one that takes seriously the livelihoods of the hardworking people who rely on this sector for their jobs. We are not interested in temporary slogans or political gratification. We are interested in protecting the jobs of our people and the strength of our country. We will be strong at home, affordable at home, and have leverage abroad. Thank you very much.